So I'm Nancy Kaplan. I'm from Citizen Action Co-op and Grassroots North Shore, and we're part of a coalition, a large group of activist organizations in the state of Wisconsin that are supporting the Fair Elections Project. Sachin Chetta is the director of the Fair Elections Project, and he's going to be talking to us about the court case, Landmark, absolutely important, maybe as important as Brown v. Board of Education, as one person, one vote, coming up in just a week from today. It's going to be argued in front of the Supreme Court. So he's going to talk about the court case and about the other things that are going on around this issue in Wisconsin. And we've given you all these postcards. Some of you have already filled them out. We'll be coming around with another action sheet and a flyer for a rally on Sunday when we're going to gather to send off the plaintiffs. It was just a matter of turning it to the right orientation, you know. Has to face Mecca.
Now I have to interrupt you for a little change, a little tweak on your microphone. I don't think it's on.
I don't think it is either. I'm just yelling. I have no idea how to turn it on. Oh.
Oh, wow. Let me go turn it down here. Thank you.
All right. Much better. Okay. I'm not going to go through the whole spiel again. You all heard me. So next week on Sunday, not next week, later this week, on Sunday, when there is no Packers game, we are having a rally to send the 12 people who brought this lawsuit off to D.C. to hear the case at the Supreme Court. And I hope some or all of you will come. It's going to be a great occasion, a joyous occasion, and we're going to eat. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sachin Chetta. He's the director of the Fair Elections Project.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot. Visual. Mind visual. It's a before and after picture. That's Wisconsin, before and after redistricting. So keep that in mind.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathan. Thanks to the Sarah Chudnow community and to the residents here for having me. And at the very last second, we got it working. Amazing. This presentation is a lot better with visual aids because then you don't have to look at me the whole time. So as Nancy said, I'm the director of the Fair Elections Project. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan campaign to end and restrict partisan gerrymandering, to end the map rigging that we think is hurting our political system and is one of the reasons why people think that our political system is broken. So let me ask a couple questions. First of all, of the folks who are here who were eligible to vote, which I'm going to assume is most of you, how many of you voted in the last election in November of 2016? And how many of you vote almost every election or every election? Okay. I'm going to ask one more question about that. How many of you think that your vote counts? Okay, well that's good. I appreciate the confidence. I'm here to tell you your vote doesn't count anymore. And so let me ask the question a different way. How many people here think our political system is broken? Almost everybody. So there's a few people who are like, well, maybe it's not broken. So I'm going to explain to those folks who do think the election system is broken, how it's broken and why it's broken. And hopefully those of you who don't think it's broken will think it's broken after this talk, and then we'll get engaged in a way to help fix it. So I'm going to start with kind of a really basic concept. So let's talk about the day after the election. How many people here were surprised the day after the election, or the night of the election? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you are talking about 2012? You're still talking about 2012? All right, a couple people. So I actually want to set the stage by going back to 2012, because 2016 was surprising, but it was surprising not because the election results didn't reflect the will of the people. It was surprising because that's not what you expected to happen, right? You didn't expect Donald Trump to win Wisconsin or to win the election. And most of the pundits didn't, right? Most of the polls didn't. But let's go back to 2012, and let's even go back to 2010 to set the stage, because that's really where the problem that we're talking about was created. So, 2 elections. In 2010, we had a wave year for the Republicans. Now, people in the room, you might be Democrats, you might be Republicans, you might be independents, you might go back and forth, doesn't matter. The story I'm going to tell today is nonpartisan. It's not intended to take sides, it's intended to talk about what's happening in our political system. So in 2010, the Republicans won a big victory. They took the governor's office after it had been held for 2 terms by Jim Doyle. They won a Senate seat, a U.S. Senate seat, when Ron Johnson beat Russ Feingold. It had been something like 22, 24, 26 years since a Republican had won it might have actually been 32 years since a Republican had won a U.S. Senate seat. 30 years, it had been 30 years. And the Republicans won about 250,000 more votes than the Democrats did for the state assembly. Now there are 99 state assembly districts. Here's a map of our current state assembly districts. There's 99 of them all around the state. And if you add up how much the Republican and Democrat got in this district, and in this district, and in this district, in aggregate, the Republicans got 250,000 more votes. So the result of the election is that they got 60 out of those 99 seats in the legislature, and the Democrats got 39. Now that's a rational result. They didn't get 60% of the vote. They got about somewhere between 55, 56% of the vote, 54% of the vote statewide. But getting 60 seats is a rational, that makes sense, right? And they won more votes, they got more seats. And as you recall, 2010 was kind of a wave year for the Republicans. 2008 and 2006, the 2 elections prior, had been wave years for the Democrats. So they were up in the number of seats, and so the Republicans got a swing. Now in 2012, we had gone through tumultuous times in Wisconsin, right? To say the least. We had had a recall of the governor. We had 9 state senate recalls. We had 100,000 people marching in the street on Act 10, massive cuts to the university and public education, lots of political strife. We were on the national news every day for months. The senators left the state. And the result in the 2012 election was that the Democrats kind of got the swing back, right? And let's just talk about, how different that was than 2010. In 2012, Tommy Thompson, who arguably had been the most popular politician in modern Wisconsin history, had been elected governor 4 times, and not just elected by massive margins, right? I think in one of those elections he got almost 70% of the vote, right? He was running for the U.S. Senate, won the primary, beat off 3 other Republicans, and was running against a very liberal, out lesbian member of Congress, Tammy Baldwin from Madison. No out LGBT person had ever won an election to the U.S. Senate, right? So this person was far to the left, LGBTQ, running against the most popular governor in modern Wisconsin, or most politician in modern Wisconsin history. And she beat him by 5 points. That's how big a year it was for Democrats. Now look, she ran a good campaign, and there's things that happened in that campaign. He was out of money after the primary, all these things. But at the end of the day, it was a big year for Democrats. And we know that election wasn't an aberration because Barack Obama won the state by 7 points. Not as big as he wanted in 2008, which was a huge Democratic year, but a convincing victory. The result was never in doubt. And that correlated with the assembly vote. The Democrats got 170,000 more votes than the Republicans. The marginal swing was 430,000 votes. Now there's only about 2 million voters in Wisconsin, right? So when you swing the vote 420,000 votes, that's a pretty massive wave of a swing from one way or the other. So you would think if the Republicans got 60 seats by winning the 250,000 aggregate vote victory, Democrats got 170,000 more votes, they should end up with 55, 56 seats out of 99, right? At the very least, they should get a majority. They got 52% of the vote. The Republicans got 47% of the vote. Pretty basic. But it turns out that just like in 2010, the Republicans got 60 seats and the Democrats got 39. The election results didn't matter. Because in the interim, in 2011, the majority Republicans had rigged the maps. And so what happened in the election didn't matter. Now, I know that sounds partisan. If there's any Republicans in the room, it's not intended to be, because in other states where Democrats had control, they rigged the maps, right? But we're going to focus mostly on Wisconsin. We have to deal with what really happened in Wisconsin. Let me show it to you on this chart in another way. Basically the same information, and you can kind of really see it visually here. If you're behind the camera, I'm sorry, you're going to have to swing around or watch the live stream later. So in 2010, remember, the Republicans got more votes. You can see it red and blue. They got more seats. But then in 2012, they got less votes. They got more seats. See the disconnection? Here, the bars match. Here, they don't match. And then in 2014, if we accelerate, the Republicans won a victory again. They got more seats. They got more seats, right? So this doesn't change. It changes just a little bit. That tells you that the election doesn't matter. If the electorate is swinging back and forth, right, shouldn't the legislature swing back and forth? That's the obvious expectation. So when I say they rigged the maps, let's talk about what that is. I'm going to skip a couple of these slides. So what is gerrymandering? What is map rigging? So in 1812, there was a governor of Massachusetts. His name was Elbridge Gerry, G-E-R-R-Y, and he was leading the effort to draw new district lines in 1812. And he drew this in northeastern Massachusetts, north central Massachusetts. He drew this district. And editorial cartoonists said, this is crazy. That does not look like a contiguous district, a simple district. And they made a picture out of it. Now, I think people here have seen salamanders, right? I think that looks like a dragon. But apparently in 1812, salamanders were much scarier. So they said that looked like a salamander, and they didn't want to say gerrymander because they wanted to mispronounce his name, so they called it a gerrymander. So this was the first known gerrymander, where you were manipulating the district lines. And his goal here was to try to give his political allies an advantage in that district. And that goes back over 200 years. It continues to be a practice. And sometimes we do it intentionally, sometimes we do it unintentionally, sometimes we do it for good reason. These are all crazy looking district maps, right? Here's another one. This is a district in Maryland. I'm gonna go back. This is actually, it is gerrymandered in that the district lines are manipulated, but it's actually gerrymandered for good reason. Because this is in the city of Chicago, and this neighborhood here and this neighborhood here are both heavily dominated by Latino residents. And by connecting those two populations together in this way, they actually create a majority Latino district that can, under the Voting Rights Act, elect someone to represent them. So this is actually not an illegal gerrymander, it's not bad, but it shows the lengths to which you can go to manipulate the maps for results, right? This map was drawn by Democrats to disenfranchise Republicans. You have a Republican area over here and a Republican area over here, but there's actually more people in this part of the district. And so these Democrats outweigh all of these Republicans, and they're able to elect in this district a Democrat, even though they're kind of disenfranchising all the Republicans down here. Now, you can sometimes see that a map has been manipulated, but you don't have to make it visually obvious. This is a map of Illinois, and if you look at this district here, that looks pretty normal, right? Like a big blob. This district looks pretty normal. There's a little bit hanging out over here, but this looks pretty normal. This definitely looks pretty normal. This looks normal. This map is actually heavily gerrymandered to advantage Democrats. And so what we've learned is that it doesn't have to just be visual. Battery run on this thing? Skip the Wisconsin one for a second here. What we want to do is use a definition that actually addresses the thing we're talking about, which is that we're attempting to establish political advantage for a particular party by manipulating the geographic boundaries to create partisan protected districts. If we use that definition, and we don't worry about whether it's visual or not, whether we can see it with the naked eye, then we can start to measure the map and determine how we get results like this, results that are that unfair. So that's our focus. We're not concerned on funny shapes. We're focused on something really basic, the misalignment of votes and seats. The idea that majority rule is the core component of democracy. If you get more votes, you get the seat, right? If you get more votes, you should get more seats. We don't think that has to always be proportional, right? If you get 50% of the seat, 50% of the vote doesn't mean you get 50% of the seats. If you get 60% of the vote, because we have district-based system, it's always, the effect is going to be amplified. If you get 53% of the vote, you might get 60% of the seats. If you get 60% of the vote, you might get 80% of the seats. But it's in the right direction. The party getting the majority of votes is going to get more seats in a proper manner. And what we think the Constitution requires that we don't have in Wisconsin is something called partisan symmetry, which is very different from proportional representation. Partisan symmetry is the concept that if one party gets, say, 53% of the vote, and that means they get 60% of the seats, then if the other party gets 53% of the vote, they should get 60% of the seats. That the party should be treated symmetrically, not equally, right? Because you still have to have the election. One party might get a lot more votes. One candidate might get a lot more votes. But we do think that each party should be required to be treated symmetrically, and that's what democracy and our Constitution requires. So, and again, the concept is that the majority should rule. So there are these traditional criteria when you draw the maps, right? So every 10 years, the maps have to be redrawn to make sure that the populations are really close to equal. That's actually only been a requirement since the 1960s. In the 1960s, there were a series of Supreme Court cases that said, we live in a country that requires each vote to be equal. We've passed these laws, right? The Voting Rights Act, and obviously the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. And the consequence of that was not just the goal of racial equality, but the goal of political equality, right? That every vote should count equally. So each district has to be of equal population. And that really started with the 1971 redrawing after the 1970 census, equal population. There's also these requirements that underrepresented groups should have the right to band together with folks from their own community, primarily African American and Latino, because they had been purposefully drawn out of power for 200 years, or 170 years, whatever it was, and 190 years, and so that was changed, and we have to have representation for underrepresented groups. And our state constitution has some basic requirements, as most state constitutions do, that the lines have to be compact and contiguous, that you don't want to break up counties or cities unless you really have to get equal population, that communities of interest should stay together. So if you don't want to have a fair map, the question is, how do you actually go and do it, right? I think it's important for people to understand that this is actually something that people go out and intentionally do. They're not just getting lucky, right? They're thinking about how people are organized when they're trying to misalign seats and votes, and use this concept of packing and cracking. So when one party gains control of the process, and at the end we'll talk a little bit how to change the process. When one party gains control of the process, what they do is they pack as many of the other party's adherents into as few districts as possible. And they give those districts huge majorities, right? So if there's 99 districts, there's no mathematical way for one party to gain control of all 99 districts, right? The goal is to get as many as they can. But their goal is to get 60 or 70, right? Their goal isn't to get 80 or 90, because that would be mathematically impossible unless you start killing off adherents to the other party, which even they haven't gone that far. So you get big wins for the losing party. Does that make sense? Big wins for the losing party, but just in a handful of districts. And then you take the rest of their supporters and you crack them into districts, you spread them out so that they can't win in those seats. Let me visually illustrate this. So over here we have, and for purposes of the illustration, we only have 64 people living in this state. In 4 districts, there are 32 purple party adherents and 32 neon green party adherents. And they're distributed around the state, and if you draw simple lines, you can put essentially 8 people from each of the 2 parties in each of those 4 districts. Now what happens in here is that elections become really meaningful, because some of these people feel really strongly in their partisan identification, and some of them less so. Some of those people lean one way, but they're really swing voters. So what happens in this district is the purple candidate is a really good candidate. They're smart, they're articulate, they work really hard, they raise money, they knock on doors, and they convince a couple of these neon green party adherents to vote for them. And the purple party candidate wins in this district. But in this district, the neon green candidate is stronger. And they run a better campaign. And they're smarter and they're more experienced, so they win. And so in each district, the election itself matters. Going out there and getting the votes and having democracy actually take place makes a difference. But if you gerrymander the map, if you draw the lines in such a way that you pack as many green, neon green party adherents into this district as possible, we have 14 out of the 16 people in this district are neon green. Of the community, they don't even have to shower, but they're going to win because they're not going to convince enough, the purple candidate's not going to convince enough people to cross over from their partisan identification. But then in these districts, these 3 districts, the purple candidate doesn't have to be the stronger candidate. They've got their party pretty well outnumbered on this. So even if one of them crosses over, the purple candidate in these 3 districts is going to win. This map, I don't care what happens in the election. I don't care how much money they raise, how many doors they knock on, how smart they are, what their agenda is, how attractive they are to the electorate. I will tell you that in this election, 3 purple candidates are going to win and 1 green candidate is going to win. And this, right here, is what happened in Wisconsin. That's what they did. They just drew the lines in such a way, and they put all the Democrats in as few districts as they could, right? About 34 of them. And they put all the Republicans with less majorities, but still strong and safe majorities in the other 2/3 of the seats, right? And they did it in the Assembly, and they did it in the Senate in 2011. So the majorities in Wisconsin have no hope of winning the majority, even if they get more votes, which is what happened in 2012. And that has a dampening effect, a chilling effect on candidates, on volunteers, on donors. What the other side says is, well, you're right, the Democrats got more votes in 2012, but it doesn't matter because the Republicans got more votes in 2014. That's what they say. It doesn't matter. They didn't keep winning. Well, don't you think that if this was the result, that maybe the Democrats did a little less well here because they weren't able to raise the money, they weren't able to get the candidates, they weren't going to win. There's nothing they could do. There was no mathematical path to victory. In fact, and I'll say this again later, they could have won, mathematically, the biggest electoral victory in Wisconsin history, and they still wouldn't have even gotten 40 seats, even with the biggest victory. More votes than they'd ever gotten before. So that also protects incumbents, right? And the incumbent party is protected. And I'm going to skip the story. What really happens is that the legislators end up then playing to the extremes. And they do that on both sides. Democratic candidates play to the extremes of the Democratic Party, and the Republican candidates play to the extremes of the Republican Party. And what's happened in Wisconsin is almost every moderate politician, and there used to be many in the legislature from both sides, they're all gone. They're all retired or defeated. I don't know how many of you are from Milwaukee County. I know we're right over the border in Milwaukee County. But in Milwaukee County, one by one, every moderate Democrat in the legislature got picked off. Every single one of them. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm a liberal Democrat. My organization is co-chaired by a Republican and a Democrat. And in a lot of those primary elections, I supported the progressive candidate. I supported the candidate that was more to the extreme. Because the system gave me a chance of winning, right? They've drawn these districts in such a way that the advantage was to the more extreme candidates. But what happens to our political system, and I look back and now I can really see the effect of this, is that the things that we have bipartisan consensus on, the things that we have agreed on as a state, Republicans, Democrats, African Americans, Latinos, whites, Native Americans, the things we've agreed on for our entire state history, those consensus are now breaking down. I'm going to use a couple examples. How many here went to University of Wisconsin System College? Half the room, a little less than half the room. We had a bipartisan consensus in the state to fund a strong world-class public university system. There was an argument about what tuition levels should be, there was always a legislator or two who was mad about faculty being too liberal, this or that thing. But the consensus was, let's have the University of Wisconsin system not just have a great football team or a great basketball team. In fact, for most of my life growing up, they didn't have either, right? But they had a phenomenal research faculty, they had great teaching, it was a growing system. Road funding, I grew up in Waukesha County. We'd go to Indiana back and forth to visit family, Ohio, and we'd cross that border on 94 in Illinois. And I'd be sitting in the back of the Pontiac Bonneville or the Chevy conversion van, and I knew when we hit that border. I didn't have to look up or look out the window. Our roads were world class, and you hit that Illinois border, and you knew that you'd hit that border because the roads weren't as good. It was like that for decades. All of a sudden now, do this the next time you drive. You still know if you hit the border. It's reversed. It's totally reversed. The roads there are better now, and our roads have gotten weaker, as everybody knows, right? Are they filling those potholes? We have a state, we have a single party controlled government, and they hadn't passed a budget. It took them 3 extra months to pass a budget because they couldn't agree on how to fund roads, right? And that's one party control. We had a bipartisan consensus around that. Water protection, public university, public schools. These are things that we agreed on, big picture. But now, you don't have the election itself as an accountability measure, right? It used to be that when the legislature went too far in one direction or the other, the people would draw them back. And now that system doesn't work. They're not accountable. They know they're going to win either way, and there's no accountability. So ideology trumps progress, and that's it. I thought there was another bullet there. There's okay. So now that we've figured out what the problem is, right, we decided to do something about it. And so after that 2012 election, when we woke up, not quite the day after the election, but in the 2 or 3 months after the election, a group of citizens got together in Milwaukee and they said, okay, we've prosecuted this election. We got more votes. We got many fewer seats. For the next 10 years, we can just keep fighting these elections and it won't matter. We're never going to get control back, right? We're never going to have a chance to hold the politicians accountable. Fred Kessler is a state representative from Northwest Milwaukee. He gathered a team of lawyers and me. I'm the one non-lawyer in the group. The head of the NAACP was there, and a lawyer who worked on a previous redistricting case, was a civil rights lawyer, and a couple other folks, me, and I was the chair of the Democratic Party at the time, and we said, we realized that there's a couple of solutions. One is we can change the process of who draws the map. Because right now what happened in 2011 is the legislature drew the map and they put their own long-term job security as the top priority, right? But the problem with changing the process is a couple of things. One is they're not going to do it right away because they'd be taking their own part away. Second, we're not going to get another map drawing process until 2021, right? We have to have the 2020 census and then we'll have new map drawing in 2021. But if we sue, and there's another problem, which is we can't initiate the process change. There's no citizen initiative in Wisconsin. In other states, you can gather signatures and put a law on the ballot and try to get the people to vote for it. So if the legislature is not responsive, you can go around the legislature. We don't have a system to do that in Wisconsin. We're literally shut out of the process if we're not in power in the legislature. So we said if we sued, we don't have to focus on the process of drawing the maps. We could just focus on whether or not the map itself is constitutionally valid. We can actually change the outcome of the process. And we figured this out. We started in 2013. We analyzed all these issues. We tried to figure out what we could do. It took us over a year to figure out that, okay, we need to sue to get law districts, and here's all the issues we have to overcome in the constitutional law. People have been trying for 30 years plus to end partisan gerrymandering by suing. And so we had to see what everybody had tried and failed at, right? And we figured out that we thought there was a path. We thought there was a path to victory. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But even if we don't win, we're going to change the conversation because people didn't know what gerrymandering was. And they didn't know that the maps were rigged. They weren't engaging in this conversation. How many people are here? 35 people? I tell you, I couldn't have gotten 35 people in a room to talk about gerrymandering 5 years ago, right? That wasn't a thing that people were that interested in. So we looked at the law. When I speak to lawyers, there's like 30 slides on the law. I will have 2, so just relax. There's not going to be a lot of slides. The big thing is there were all these cases. The Supreme Court had kind of indicated that they thought excessive partisan gerrymandering, excessive rigging of the maps to benefit a political party was unconstitutional, but they couldn't find a test. They couldn't figure out how to measure it and how rigged the maps were was confirmed. Because the Republicans won a huge victory, but they didn't get that many more seats. Right? They got basically the same, they got 3 more seats, but they got a huge swing in the vote, right? So we saw that was stable. And we hired these experts, we filed the case in federal court, and this was in July of 2015. And then we had to, I'm going to come to this in a second, then we had to overcome a motion to dismiss from the state. Again, no case had overcome a motion to dismiss in 30 years. And we won that 3-0. It was a 3-judge panel, we won 3-0. Then we had to overcome a summary judgment motion, and we won that 3-0. And in May of 2016, about 10 months after we filed the case, almost 11 months, we went to trial, and there was a trial. And then 6 months later, well, I'm going to get to that in a second. So we asked for a test, this 3-part test, it was documented incremental. Let me tell you what the test was. I got to know what order my slides is. So what we wanted in the test was we wanted to say we had to prove partisan intent, we had to prove partisan effect, and we had to ensure that the map was not justifiable on other grounds. The reason this is important is because we weren't just saying measure the map, we were saying make us prove it. And this is the same process that's used to determine if a map is racially gerrymandered to an over, not in a voting rights way, but to actually disenfranchise people of color. So we based on that test, and I gotta see what slide I got here. And what had happened a few years earlier is there had been a case, I mentioned this lawyer, Peter Earle, and he'd helped prosecute a case in which they challenged the map on a bunch of different grounds, and they didn't make a lot of progress. They won, but they just changed like the one line between these 2 districts. There's these 2 districts right here in Milwaukee, and there was one line between them, and they just moved the line a little bit. But in the process of prosecuting that case, there was a lot of discovery, right? There was a lot of information that was unearthed that the Republicans who had drawn the maps didn't want to be public. And when they drew these maps, they drew them very quickly, much quicker than normal, and they drew them in a secret map room, and they used a really kind of corrupt process. It's been talked a lot about in public, because there was these recall elections happening. Remember the controversy over Act 10? And what they were afraid was going to happen in the summer of 2011 is they were going to lose control of one house of the legislature, the Senate. And the math was that they might lose, right? So they pounded these maps through as fast as they could. And they didn't make public all the criteria and all the data that they used. They didn't actually lose control in 2011, but they did lose control in 2012. And when they lost control in 2012, it turned out that, well, now the Democrats were in charge of the Senate just for a few months, and they were the clients of the lawyers who had helped draw the maps. So they said, well, give us all the files. Give us the files. And they hadn't wanted to turn these files over. So the lawyers were running around. They were from a law firm, big law firm in Wisconsin, and they said, we don't want to turn over. Well, we're just going to turn over the same files that we've already turned over in the federal trial discovery. We're not going to give them anything new. Except they had, I don't know if they had someone honest working there or they just made a mistake. They turned over 34 documents. And there were tens of thousands of documents. But there were 34 documents that hadn't previously been disclosed. And so when the lawyers figured out, wow, there's these 34 documents, what else is out there? And then there was a bunch more litigation that went back and forth. And at the end of the process, the federal court was really, really mad at the Republicans. They were really, really mad at the law firm. They fined them a bunch of money, and they said, you have to turn over the hard drives. We're not going to rely on you to pull the documents down and give them over. We want you to actually take the hard drives out of the computers and hand them over. And one of the hard drives had been smashed with a hammer, but there were mirror copies, and so out of these 9 hard drives that existed, 8 of them got turned over. And when they went to these hard, they found more documents and more documents and more documents. And one of the documents that they found, which eventually, as they were going up to trial in our case, in the Whitford case, they said, what does the spreadsheets tell us in all this data and they went back and they were like, well, we got to figure out what we can find. And they found these spreadsheets, and the Republicans started with the 2000s map, the map from the 10 years prior. And under that map, there was like a baseline of 49 Republican seats. So they started tweaking the map to make it more Republican. They got it up to 52 seats, they got it up to 56 seats, 57 seats, 58 seats. And the names of the files, they started with 2000s map, Joe base map basic, Joe base map assertive, Joe was the guy drawing the maps. Tad, make you an ID, Joe assertive, Tad aggressive 1, Tad aggressive 2. So they literally had the names of the maps as they got more assertive and more aggressive. And they got the map up to 59 seats from 49 seats. This was the baseline Republican allocation of seats. And then they kept tweaking it. See how this line got flat? But what they did is they kept it at 59, but they made the 59 stronger and stronger and stronger. And what they were testing here, they used something called a swing analysis. They actually tested if the election went more and more Democratic, can we keep the map impervious to those election results? They actually tested that. They didn't say, well, let's make the map fair because we want, Beloit to have a seat, we want Nina and Menasher to be together, and we want it to be equal population. They tested the map to say, can we make the election not meaningful? And then they had to turn the spreadsheets over because the federal court made them turn the hard. They actually didn't turn the spreadsheets over, right? They were on the hard drives. They'd never released any of this stuff in discovery. We found the documents. Guess what? We proved partisan intent, right, at this trial because they had the partisan intent. We proved partisan effect. This is the same as this chart over here. We had an expert measure 800 redistricting plans in modern American history. 50 years worth of plans, over 40 states with publicly available data. By one measure, Wisconsin was the 4th most partisan map. By another measure, Wisconsin was the most partisan map in modern American history. So we showed that there was an effect, right? The justices said, it achieved the intended effect, it secured for Republicans a lasting assembly majority. That's what the judge who wrote the decision. The judge was appointed, by the way, he's a conservative Notre Dame law professor on senior status, and he was appointed by President Reagan to the federal bench. That's who wrote this decision. And then we showed with our experts and with data that you could draw a fair map. Remember those maps that Nancy showed you at the beginning? The colors, it's hard to tell because there's more rural counties on kind of thing, but basically this was the unfair map, and we showed that if you drew the map fairly, you would have a lot more blue seats. And there was no justifiability for what they'd done other than partisan intent, right? And so after this trial, we had to wait 6 months. In fact, there was yet another election. Now there's been 2 elections since we filed the case. There was the 2016 election. And in November, 2 weeks after the election, we got a decision. Skip that here. And we won. We won. The maps were declared unconstitutional because they had rigged them to make elections not meaningful. Are you stunned into silence, or are you just not caring? So this is a big moment. We actually won a federal trial. This had not happened ever before. Yay, that's right. Sometimes I get applause there. I don't know what. Sorry. The court issued a really clear ruling that the maps were unconstitutional. They were intended to burden the representational rights of Democrats. And so what we're now leading up to, and I'm almost done, is next week. Now, I made this slide in May, so it looked far off then. But on Tuesday, a week from today, wait, what day of the week is today? Tuesday. I have no idea what day of the week is. I have 4 children. That's my excuse. A week from today, we will be at the Supreme Court. The term starts on Monday. We're the second or third case, I think, to be heard in this term. And the state is basically appealing. The Attorney General and the legislature are saying, yes, the federal court found this map unconstitutional. Throw that decision out. Let us do whatever we want. That's essentially what their argument is. There's been lots of briefing. The state is spending millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've hired big guns to try to save the map. We've hired big guns to try to keep the map thrown out. We think our chances are high. We think we've got a real good chance of winning. And basically it comes down to Justice Kennedy believing that he issued this invitation in 2004 and that we've now responded to the invitation. And if he agrees with that, we're pretty likely to win. It doesn't solve all the problems, even if we win. There will still be some gerrymandering, but we will be able to limit the worst cases of it, right? We'll be able to limit the reach. So maybe if they get 52% of the vote, instead of getting 65% of the seats, they'll get 59% of the seats, right? Maybe if if the Democrats get 52% of the vote, we'll get 50% of the seats, right? I mean, the idea is to lop off the worst cases. But in order for that to happen, candidates on both sides, what we want to get to, remember the purple and green chart, we want the elections to matter. We want shoe leather and hard work and actually going out and asking for votes to be the thing that matters. Parties still need to find elections and promote an agenda and raise money and win elections. If they don't do that, none of this will matter, right? Because that's the work that's got to get done. We won't get totally fair maps, but we will get fairer maps, right? Not fair maps, but fairer maps. The Fair Elections Project didn't sound very good, so we called it the Fair Elections Project. We want you, however, to be involved. This is, I think, my last slide or my next last slide. When people hear about legal cases, they say, that's great, I'm really interested, I'm reading the news, I'm listening to your presentation, now I'm going to move on with my life. Because the lawyers are the ones fighting it out, right? But in this case, we're actually trying to build a grassroots movement of people who care about fair elections. And we want that movement to be Republicans and Democrats and independents, not just partisans. So we're partnering all over the country with people, and we want the legislature to draw the maps using an open and transparent process. We want there to be public hearings, and we want the public to put pressure on even these legislators to call for that. We want to pass a bill to make the process independent. We're fighting for that. We want to hold, even conservative Republicans who like the policy that this legislature and this governor have put forward are offended by the massive amounts of money that they're spending to defend a rigged system. In fact, there's a paper, the Beloit Daily News. The Beloit Daily News has got to be the most conservative newspaper in the state. It's owned by a guy who's a right-wing activist. I'm sure he's a nice guy, I don't know. He has spent editorial after editorial after editorial excoriating the legislature, excoriating the governor, excoriating the attorney general, people he supported politically on policy issues for spending taxpayer money to defend these rigged maps. We want to hold them accountable for that. And we are trying to get counties all over the state to pass resolutions. We have gotten 30 out of 72 counties in Wisconsin now to pass a resolution calling on the state to make the process independent and nonpartisan. A majority of those counties, 2/3 of those counties, voted for Trump. The average margin that this resolution is passing by in these county boards is 2-1. And that means there's lots of local conservatives in Wisconsin who are supporting the idea of nonpartisan redistricting. There was a resolution this weekend at the Wisconsin Counties Association. 56 counties voted to make the process nonpartisan. And I guarantee you a majority of the people who voted for it are conservatives. So we're trying to show grassroots reports everywhere, grassroots support everywhere. And we need your help because we're fighting not just the legal battle, right, and the public relations battle in the media, but we're trying to organize the grassroots, working with Grassroots North Shore and Citizen Action, cooperatives, and Organizing for America and Common Cause, and the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, and the ACLU, and One Wisconsin Institute. All these organizations and many more are working together with League of Women Voters to try to make this process fair. And so we want you to support the Fair Elections Project and support those organizations. So that's my presentation. Thanks so much.
So before we get to questions, let me just, before we get to questions, some of you picked up postcards. So the postcards are addressed to the chairs of the legislative committees that have to hold public hearings on laws that would, a proposed law that would change the process in Wisconsin going forward. The court case, should we win, from our lips to God's ears, will change the maps now, but says nothing about what will happen in the future without further litigation. Changing the law means changing the process going forward, and giving us a chance to change the Constitution of the state down the line. So the bills are in these committees, they're bottled up. To have anything happen, there have to be public hearings. So the postcards will go to the chairs of those committees. All you need to do is write your name and your zip code and hand them back in, and we will mail them for you. And the other thing is my lovely assistants here are passing out some action sheets. So in addition to signing the postcard, there are a few things you can do, low cost, low energy things to do to help spread the word, like use your Facebook and Twitter accounts, have those, and talk to your friends and neighbors.
Or your grandchildren.
Or your grandchildren's. Yeah, you can get help. There's no cheating in this business, right? Call these people. Call your own legislators, and I understand there is at least one county supervisor here in the audience today. Yeah, right here. Thank you. Let him know that you support this. I understand it's going to come up in Ozaukee County sometime later in October. Is that true? We're hoping.
It may very well, but I'll have a question after.
Okay. Okay. So, and we're continuing to introduce resolutions in counties all over the state. And the other thing you can do is this little piece. Come to this rally on Sunday. Why is it important to do this? Well, we want the plaintiffs to know that we're with them. But more than that, we want the public to know that this is something Wisconsin citizens care deeply about. And to do that, we need the numbers. So there's no Packer game, so pack yourself up, come down to Plymouth Church, have a rally, some sloppy joes, have fun, and we'll send them off in style. Okay, questions for Sunshine?
Yes, sir.
For lobbying Madison, the Iowa situation came up and what they have done. And I didn't have enough details to refute what they were talking about. So what did Iowa do?
Sure. So the question from the back was, what do they do in Iowa? People talk about the Iowa model of redistricting. So in Wisconsin, the legislature, the Assembly and the Senate, pass a new redistricting plan in the year after the census is completed, and then it has to be signed by the governor. So you have the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor. And if all three of them are from one party in Wisconsin or in another state, right, like in Illinois, that was the case, and in Maryland, that was the case, then those states can bias the maps, rig the maps in their party's favor if they have what's called unitary control, right? What Iowa did a long time ago is they said, we don't want politicians drawing the maps. We don't want politicians deciding who their voters are. We want voters deciding who their politicians are, who their elected officials are, right? And so they took the process out of the legislature's hands. They gave it to a nonpartisan commission. It's basically like an independent state employee draws a map. The map has to adhere to some criteria about fairness. And then that map, it still has to be voted on by the legislature, but they can only vote it up or down. They can't change it. And every time they've just accepted it, because that's the political reality in Iowa. In fact, in Iowa, they have unitary control, but they didn't end this process because the public is really behind there being this independent redistricting process. So we have a bill, a legislative bill, SB 13, AB 44, that is the thing that we want, that Nancy was talking about, that we want a hearing on. So that's a bill to adopt a version of the Iowa model in Wisconsin. And what would happen is the Legislative Reference Bureau, who are nonpartisan, professional, permanent staff attorneys, they don't support just Republicans or Democrats, they're independent staff attorneys, they would draw the map, and then the legislature would just be forced to vote it up or down. And so, look, I don't think that this legislature is going to adopt the Iowa model. What could happen, there's a couple models here. One is, if we win in the Supreme Court, their ability to rig the maps will be severely limited. And they may make a decision that politically, internally to their own body, right, that it's better for them to punt the question than to try to meet the demands of all their internal constituencies. That's a theory. I'm not sure if it's a good theory, but that's a theory. The other reality is, if you split control of the government by electing a governor of another party in the 2018 election, then in 2020, you're not going to have unitary control. So they can either punt to an independent body, they can pass this bill and punt to an independent body, and retain some measure of control, right? Because they could vote the plan down and force them to draw a new plan, right? That's still fairer, but they can make them draw a new plan. Or not do that, and it'll end up in the courts and they'll have no control at all. because the federal court will impose a redistricting plan. That's actually what happened in Wisconsin in 1981, 91, and 2001. The parties couldn't agree, so the federal courts drew our maps. And they generally drew pretty fair maps because they don't have a partisan axe to grind. And the judges aren't even often from Wisconsin, so they're just looking at the data. So that's the Iowa model, is to make the process independent. And that's something that we're fighting for, here and across the country. Yes, ma'am?
So if the Supreme Court upholds the decision, how is that likely to impact 2018 election?
Yeah, so the question was, if the Supreme Court upholds the trial court decision, if we win, what will happen in 2018 in Wisconsin? So the short answer is that we'll have a new map. I don't know for how long we'll have that new map before the election happens. It might not be a very long time. So the argument is in October, kind of in a best case scenario, we would see a decision from the Supreme Court in our favor in December, January, February, somewhere in that time frame. What would happen then is the Supreme Court would tell the trial court, okay, we agree with your decision, go get new maps. And the trial court would very quickly figure out a process. They would probably ask the legislature to pass a new map, adhering to the standard. They'd give them a few weeks to do that, 4, 6, 8, whatever many weeks they give them. And the legislature will either draw a better map and the court will accept it, or they won't, in which case the court will then be forced to draw their own map. And there's all kinds of different processes a federal court can use to draw a map. They can hire somebody to do it, they can invite submissions and evaluate them, they can get a special master, they can do all kinds of things, right? And that happens all the time because lots of states have split control and they can't decide on a map. And so hopefully by early summer, late spring, we'll have a new map, and people will have to decide to run under those new districts. And we have a primary election in the middle of August. Worst case scenario, maybe they have to push the primary election a little bit, but hopefully the Supreme Court will come up with a quick decision in our favor, and the trial court will work fast, and we'll have new maps by the spring. And then people can have a November election that's fair. And look, I don't think we're going to change partisan control of the assembly when it's 65-34 right now. But you can see some significant change, and you're going to see some big change in the districts because you'll get fairer districts. So, did you have a question?
Yes. You mentioned that about a third of the counties had passed a resolution. Is that right?
Yeah, 30 out of 72. So we're approaching half. Yeah.
Okay, almost half.
So,
have any taken the vote and it lost?
yes.
How many did
Nancy?
Okay, so one county, Kenosha,
Kenosha.
turned it down and then revoted and adopted it. So now
Like
it's
a month or two
zero.
later. So no other counties have voted it down?
No,
There are counties that have refused to consider it.
that I
right?
don't know about.
Yeah, there are counties where it's been introduced as a resolution that hasn't.
Okay,
been
so
considered.
putting it before a county board is not a difficult thing to do because one supervisor can put an item on the agenda.
Yeah, but they can't necessarily get a vote at the full board, but right.
Yeah, the point is, when I talked to the people that initiated this, a fellow that I've forgotten the county he's from, but that had the first
Yeah,
vote.
the first vote this year, Hans in Lincoln County, Hans Brian Moser.
And I talked to one of the supervisors there, and we exchanged some emails. He eventually said to me, we don't need losses in this, Carl. So think seriously about whether your county is likely to pass it or not.
Yeah,
So
I
that kind of caused me to go,
Yeah.
oh, well, I hadn't really thought, I'm not trying to
Yeah,
help.
let me
Bill
repeat for
Dunn.
everybody so they can hear what you're saying. It's good. So what, and I'm sorry, what's your name?
Carl.
Carl.
Yeah.
And you're a county supervisor?
Yes.
Okay, great. Carl the county supervisor. It's like a children's book. Carl the county supervisor. Carl was saying, has any county proposed a resolution and it not passed? And that he got some advice, don't introduce it if it's not going to pass. I'm going to disagree with that. Part of the problem in our politics is that we don't actually have the debate. And that's when we talk about what's happening in the university, or what's happening with roads, or what's happening with environmental protection, what's happening is the political process is getting short-circuited. The people actually are pretty united on these things. There's no groundswell of Wisconsin citizens who want to destroy the world-class university system of the UW. In fact, I do work for a nonprofit in northeast Wisconsin called New North Incorporated, whose board is made up entirely of corporate executives. Almost all of whom are members of Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, almost exclusively Republicans who supported Scott Walker. And that board unanimously passed a resolution saying, please don't cut the university. But they didn't listen because partisan control is set in stone. So I would actually argue that it's important to have this debate. It's not just about winning. It's about putting the issue in front of people. And I think you will be surprised, and we will be surprised, at who will get on board. But if you don't ask, people don't get on board. There's a Republican congressman in Green Bay named Mike Gallagher who is a champion on this issue. I don't know that I agree with him on anything else, but on this issue, he's a champion. He's sponsoring the national bill to end partisan gerrymandering for congressional redistricting. He, is aligned with Arnold Schwarzenegger and John Kasich and others who've signed on amicus briefs. So I would say that, look, I don't know if it's going to pass Ozaukee County or not, but it's not a talking point for me that it's passed unanimously or that we've never had a loss. We're saying, look, we're at 30. And if we go out and have the debate in 20 more counties, we're going to get over half the counties. We're already at over half the population. We're already at 2/3 of the counties that have passed it, voted for Trump, or Republican counties, not Democratic counties, right? So I would rather you have the debate. That's as the Fair Elections Project Director, I would never offer the advice that you shouldn't introduce this because we're afraid of losing. We want to have the debate. So, any more questions?
And then it gets reported to the newspaper how it came out, one way or the other, too, so we all know how our own people.
That's right. She's right. The more public discussion there is of this issue, the more conversations on the news, the more conversations in coffee shops, the more meetings like this, right? The more we talk about this issue, the more people are convinced that this is wrong. You don't have to be a Democrat to think this is wrong. You don't have to be a Republican or an independent. It doesn't matter. It's just wrong. You can look at it and say, look, the election should be meaningful, right? You can look at this chart over here and say, wow, we have, we've looked at redistricting plans from 1972 to 2014. There's 800 plans represented on this chart, and we're down here, right? This is the most biased, least biased, right? These are things that people can get on board with, and that's why we have, at the Fair Elections Project, bipartisan leadership. We have a former Senate Majority Leader who's a Republican and a former Senate Majority Leader who's a Democrat, Dale Schultz and Tim Cullen, and they're our co-chairs. And they represent this view that there need to be some moderates, that it can't just be people on the two wings, that we have to have a government that works for all of us. And that's the thing that we're looking for at the Fair Elections Project. Whatever all of our own political persuasion is, right? I'm not going to become more moderate because I think we need a system that works. I want a system that works because I know that the result of that is that people think that Wisconsin's a better state. People want to move here. They want to go to college here. They want to raise their family here. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. So on that note, I'll let it go and I'll stick around as I'm breaking down here and answer any more questions. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Anthony.
Can I just say we have two prospective candidates for assembly right here in this room. Mike Thoreau is going to run against Knodel on the 24th, and Chris Roloff is going to run against Brooks in the 60th. New maps or old, we're in it to make it a case. And so what Sachin was just saying is the most important thing. You can't make change unless you talk about things. And you can't make it without lots of warm bodies caring. So you're the warm bodies, you have to care, you have to show up, right? That's how we work it.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
When you're talking to your grandkids about fair elections and gerrymandering, remind them to register to vote.
Yes. Today was National Voter Registration Day, and in Wisconsin now, anybody can help anybody register to vote. So you just need a computer and somebody who knows what they're doing. And you're in. So Sachin will be here for a few minutes. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, I understand. Well, thanks for coming and pass the information out.